I'm here with Dr. Graham Leonard. He is the Baszler Chair of Excellence for the Integration of the Arts, Sciences, and Rhetoric at East Tennessee State University. You are teaching some courses for us here at ETSU in the spring semester, and have quite an interesting history, and your experiences have taken you all across the world. I know that your family came across the mountains of East Tennessee in 1760. And
it was then still Carolina.
It was then still Carolina, and from there you spent 35 years in the Middle East. Can you give us some idea of how you got from the mountains of East Tennessee to...
Well, when I was young, every time it rained, I traveled in the National Geographic. I'd get the maps out, and then I'd read the stories and look at the pretty pictures and so forth. And so I was very much interested in the world. And when I went to the University of Tennessee, I majored in international relations, very pretentious title. And I won a scholarship to the School of Advanced International Studies in Washington from the Arabian American Oil Company. And I studied Arabic, Middle Eastern studies, and so forth. And then when I finished that, I wanted to go and live in the Middle East. So I went out in 1950 and traveled overland from Paris all the way to Jerusalem. And I suppose I was the first person to do that after the war. In fact, when I crossed the border from Yugoslavia into Greece, we had to tread our way. There was a British Boy Scout at the same time. We were the only two. They'd been fighting 2 weeks before on that border. The communists in Yugoslavia had been fighting the Greeks. And we had to tread our way through the minefields following a chalk line. So it was quite interesting. So then I spent a year in Ramallah, which is 12 miles north of Jerusalem, teaching in a Quaker school. The Quakers started schools there in 1866 for women, and then started a boys' school in 1901. And they're the two most important schools for the Palestinians, very influential. And I taught there for a year, and then I went back in 55 to 57, married a Palestinian from Nazareth, and I was hooked. So I've spent 35 years between 1950 and 1996. Then I came back to live in America.
And so now you're living in East Tennessee?
Actually, I'm living near Washington because my older daughter lives there.
Okay.
I actually have two homes. I've always voted here at East Tennessee. In fact, I ran for Congress as the Democratic candidate in 2004
against
the Iraq War.
Okay. Okay. And can you tell us then a little bit about some of your experiences in the Middle East? What kinds of cultural differences were there for you when you first went there? And what kinds of things do we need to understand about that culture that will help us?
Well, many people go and travel and live in other parts of the country, of other parts of the world, but they don't learn the language and live with the people. And I think that I was very privileged. As I told you earlier, I've just spent a little over 2 months in the Middle East this fall. I was there 4 months last winter and spring. But this last trip, I was almost 10 weeks in the Middle East. I stayed in 12 different homes of 7 different religious communities. And in all of those homes, I was received as Uncle Graham, which is what I'm called out there. And as I got on the plane in Cairo flying back, I suddenly realized how greatly privileged I've been to be able to be a part of living with them and in their culture. And of course, if you live in someone else's culture or learn a foreign language, you make all kinds of mistakes. And you have to be willing to make a fool of yourself over and over again. And I've done it, believe me. So I think of lots of incidences, so most of them too embarrassing to tell, but you just don't know. For instance, I once invited a man who had had a great tragedy in his family. 3 of his children and 2 of his nephews had found a hand grenade and didn't know that it was a hand grenade, and the candy merchant wouldn't trade it for candy because he said it's not all metal. And so they were playing with it, and they pulled the pin.
Oh.
And these 5 little boys went up in pieces.
Oh my.
And their mother was standing on the roof hanging out laundry and saw it all. And I went down to console them. And, well, what do you say for somebody like that?
Right.
So I realized that they needed to get out of that village, and so I invited him to come to be the gardener for me, and live in a little house that was on the property that the Quakers owned there. And I didn't realize he was one of the most respected mayors, spokesmen of villages in that whole area. And I asked him to be my gardener.
Oh my!
But I gardened with him, so
Yes.
he wasn't a servant.
Yes.
But still, I mean, we make such foolish mistakes, and we don't realize. And then there are a lot of things that you can say in one language and you can't say in another, and I make those mistakes.
And you talked to me earlier about some advice that you had given to soldiers going into Iraq.
When I ran for Congress, at the same time, the Tennessee National Guard from 1st District, it was then called the 278th. It's now called the 278th, I think. Same regiment, just different battalion number. And they're called the Tennessee Peacemakers. And they were going out to Iraq. And so I called, since I'm a pacifist, I realized I was having trouble in East Tennessee. So I called and offered to give them background material, Arabic, about Islam and about Iraq and so forth. And I said, I've lived out there 35 years and I'm from this area. And so they invited me to come and talk to the officers and the intelligence officers especially. And they said, well, would you be willing to speak to the soldiers? So I gave 4 3-hour lectures to each of 8 units in East Tennessee before they went. And I think it was very helpful to them. So they invited me to come out as their chief interpreter, but instead I went as an embedded journalist. So I went first to Baghdad and Karbala for 3 weeks with the Christian Peacemaker team, with no protection, no helmets, no nothing. And I had a video camera. Because of the language, I could take pictures and move around and speak to people and so forth. But then I went into the green zone and was embedded with the Tennessee National Guard and spent 5 weeks with them, going on patrol day or night, about every other day. And it was a wonderful experience for me. I was then 78.
Oh my goodness! Well, I thought it was interesting. You told me one of the comments that you made to some of those soldiers was about respect, and about how important that is for them to realize the respect for the people in the Middle East is just as important as it is for us here in East Tennessee.
Well, East Tennessee understands that because we have feuds because somebody insulted Great Aunt Susie 100 years ago.
Long time.
Families feud.
That's right.
And so I said, look, the Iraqis are the same way. For them, respect is more important than life. And so when I got out there, they'd been there 2.5 months. And people all wanted to talk to me because I was the first American they'd met that spoke Arabic. And they would say to me, who are these people? We've had 4 units out here, 2 paratroopers, 1 National Guard from North Carolina, and now this one from Tennessee. Who are they? They're the first ones that treated us like humans. So they did a fabulous job out there. They're the only American unit that I know of that recruited, trained, and left Iraqis in their place.
And that was their mission.
Yes, and that was a really great accomplishment since they had so little language in common. But they managed that, and they did it very, very well. They're an extraordinary group. But you asked me about things that were different. We, for the last 300 years, have been trying to be individualists in the West. But in most of the rest of the world, and certainly in the Middle East and in China, where I taught for 2 years, people first think of family, their identity. It isn't loyalty. They're not loyal to the family. Their identity lies in the family. So if a cousin or a brother, or a sister especially, in any way causes shame, the whole family loses respect. So they spend all their lives worried not just about misbehaving themselves, but about the whole family misbehaving.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's so very different, and we don't understand that because
No.
we think of people as being individualists,
Right.
and having individual responsibility. But for them, that isn't important. What's important is family, and through the family, the community.
Mm-hmm.
The Turks ruled the Arab world, the Middle East, for 500 years. And the Turks had an extraordinary system of allowing each community, religious community or ethnic community, like the Kurds, ethnic, although they were Muslim, but the Armenians was both religion and ethnic.
Mm-hmm.
But each community had its own laws, its own courts for marriage, divorce, inheritance, and for even murder within the community. And then if they had trouble between communities, they went to arbitration. And if they didn't accept the arbitration, then they went to the Turkish courts. And the Turkish courts were so tough. They didn't go but once a generation to
Yeah.
the Turkish courts. So these communities for 500 years have been their real identity. So when people ask me about Sunnis and Shias in Iraq, there's no difference religiously. That's not the problem. The problem is they've got 500 years of fighting each other and oppressing each other and killing each other's uncles and aunts and so forth and so on. So that's the trouble, is all that inherited anger and animosity.
Well, let me ask you this then. I know you've spent a lot of time in the Middle East. What brought you back to the United States?
Old age.
I see.
I came back when I was 70.
Uh-huh.
But I still go back to the Middle East. I was 6 months this year in the Middle East. I have a project. I'm trying to revive discussion-based education in the Arab world because they memorize everything. But in the Abbasid period, 755 to 1258, was the great golden age where they gave us trigonometry and algebra and chemistry and all these things. They had different kinds of methods of education, including discussion. And discussion helps people to develop their own minds and so forth and so on. So it's extremely important. So that I'm trying to start that in the Arab world, in Arabic, using Arabic textbooks and so forth. And it's now accepted in the Jordan Ministry of Education, 6th to the 10th grade. Last year we did 6th and 7th grade, this year 8th grade, next year 9th, and the year after the 10th. But it's very difficult for the teachers. The teachers are very used to being very authoritative.
Mm-hmm.
And for them to have to sit in a circle with the students, and let the students speak to each other, not speak through the teacher, or to and from the teacher. It's going to take time.
Well, some of us in the United States still struggle with the same thing.
But in fact, I started the same program. It's called Touchstones. I started the same program in Sullivan County. And so it has been very successful. The kids love it, and the teachers do too. Everyone needs to learn to express themselves.
Yes.
This is what word rhetoric means, to put your ideas into language and to speak precisely and concisely. That's really the sign of good education.
What do you think then, with all of your experience in the Middle East and your background in education, and are we going to be able to have an exit strategy that will work in Iraq?
Well, you know, I was dead set against going in.
Absolutely.
And I think they would get out as fast as possible. But we've made such a mess that we can't just walk out, because it would be a lot of trouble. But one of the things that the world needs to know is that when they called this business of sending the surge, the extra 30,000 troops, they took credit that made the difference. That wasn't what made the difference. At the same time, we began to give subsidies, that is, to bribe the Sunni sheikhs. And of course, the Sunni sheikhs didn't like these extremists in the street any better than we do, because they were threatening their authority. So they were very glad now to take our money and to use it to put down the extremists. And we should have been doing this from the beginning.
I see.
One of our biggest problems is that we don't have enough Americans who understand other cultures. In 2007, in 1957, I was coming back on a freighter from the Middle East on my honeymoon, and Sputnik went across the sky.
Mm-hmm.
And so America was so frightened by Sputnik that the Russians got something in a satellite out
Right.
before we did, that we got together and started something called the National Defense Education Act, in which we not only worked on math and sciences and things like that, and did these wonderful TV programs on biology and math and physics, and chemistry and physics and so on, but we also gave a lot of money to people to learn unusual languages and the cultures that went with them. So I had one of my years at Harvard was on the National Defense Education Act, and I was very shocked this year that neither candidate proposed. They're all talking about education, but no one's saying, we need a new National Defense Education Act. We had 12 people when we went in Iraq that could speak Arabic in the Army. We need hundreds.
Hundreds, yes.
And they shouldn't all be immigrants. They should be hillbillies like me. I mean, I'm an East Tennessee hillbilly that speaks Arabic fluently. Well, if I can do it, anybody can do it. Language is not a matter of intelligence. Learning a language is a matter of practice and being willing to make a fool of yourself and get in there and do it.
And being able to speak that language makes a big difference.
But it's not just knowing the language. Once you know the language, then, or while you're learning the language, you need to learn the culture, and you need to go and live with the people and get to understand them and so forth. And there's so many things. We had some funny incidences with the National Guard. One day a man came to the gate and insisted he wanted to be a part of our army we were recruiting. And they refused him, and we weren't recruiting at that time. So suddenly he blurted out, "I've paid my $200, you have to take me." And so then the colonel and I went running out to the gate to meet him, and I interviewed him, found out he'd given $200 to the chauffeur of the man that was the head of our unit, the Arab that was the head of our unit, the Iraqi was the head of our unit. And so it was kind of obvious where the money went.
Right.
So the colonel and everybody was getting ready, well, how are we going to replace him in this hand? I said, wait a minute. Anybody that's the head of anything has to give money to orphans and widows and all this. He has to have a lot of money to give out. Do you have a budget for that? No. I said, well then, that's where he's not going to spend this money on himself. That's money for him to be able to play the role of leader. A leader must be generous in the Arab Muslim world. So I said, well, one thing I can tell you, he's going to call you on the telephone and make an appointment for tomorrow, because by now he knows that you know that the money's coming to his chauffeur. So he's going to come find out what's going to happen. And they started laughing. I said, why are you laughing? So he called 10 minutes ago, and he's coming tomorrow morning. So they said, how did you know that? Well, this is just the way the culture works. And that's the kind of thing that we need to learn.
Understand
about other cultures. And of course, many people in the world understand us better than we understand them, because they have the advantage of all our TV and movies and so forth. But we need to understand other cultures. We ought to be teaching Chinese in every high school in America. Not because China's going to be our enemy, but to make China our great partner in the future.
Right. China's
so we need to learn Chinese and Urdu and all the other languages of the world. And I'm sorry to tell you that the percentage of people who speak Arabic in the American embassies and consulates in the Middle East is lower than it was when I went there in 1950. Another thing, when I first went to the Middle East, no one could be in our embassies if they weren't Native American born. And now a very high percentage of our people in the Middle East are not native born Americans. Mm-hmm. And there's no reason why we shouldn't have a lot of people in learning these foreign languages. They do in Utah. The Mormons learn these languages so they can go out as missionaries.
That's quite interesting.
We had on our base a man that was doing the interrogating, and he knew Arabic. He was not from this area. Mm-hmm. He'd been brought in by the army, and I didn't know he was on the base for a couple of weeks. And when I met him, I said, well, where'd you learn your Arabic? He said, I started in high school. I said, where? In Utah. He said, how'd you know? How'd you know? Utah. I said, well, that's the only place in the country where they teach Arabic in high school. But I don't mean we need to teach Arabic in high school here, but we need to speak it, teach it in universities.
There's certainly room for that.
But do you know that there is a bill that was put in the Congress in June 2001 to punish every university in this country that has a Middle East Studies Center, because people in Congress felt, some people in Congress felt, that if you studied Arabic, you became too friendly with the Arabs. And I just
in 2001?
It was in June. Well, of course, when 9/11 came, we realized Congress wouldn't vote for that after that,
right,
because they knew that we needed more people.
Right.
That knew that. But they are still trying to get that bill through Congress. That bill is still active. Well, this is insanity. Imagine, we need thousands of people to know the language.
Especially in light of what's currently going on in the Middle East,
Yes.
with Gaza and Palestine.
And look, I've lived out there 35 years. For 58 years or 60 years, I've been studying Arabic and Islam and so forth. And I don't even begin to understand a little bit of it. So we really are behind the eight ball. We need to work on that.
I know that you're teaching a course at ETSU
Well, they've
in the
asked
spring.
me, the history department has asked me to teach a course called Origins of Problems in the Middle East in one semester of 3 hours a week. It's a bit much to
There's
try.
not quite enough time.
We're going to specialize. We're going to concentrate on the promises that were made before World War I and the treaties that were made after World War I. You know, a treaty was made with the Treaty of Versailles, the Treaty of Sèvres, which is near Versailles, which settled the question of the Ottoman Empire, the old Turkish Ottoman Empire. And then, after 2 years, the Greeks had invaded the area that they were going to take, and Ataturk had defeated them. And so Ataturk was demanding that he have more territory. Constantinople and the whole Bosphorus, Dardanelles, was going to be internationalized, so that the Russians would have a warm water port. It promised to the Russians, to the Tsars, but we weren't going to give it to the communists, so we were going to have it open international. But Ataturk insisted, no, that's going to be Turkey. And he wanted Mosul in northern Iraq because he knew there was oil there. The French didn't know, and the British wanted it because of the oil too. So they tore up the Treaty of Sèvres. The joke is, Sèvres, China, is very, very delicate, so it could be broken. So they broke this treaty and rewrote the treaty in 1923 called the Treaty of Lausanne. And that treaty drew the lines that are causing all the trouble in the Middle East now. But they were drawn entirely by French and English and others in Europe without any reference whatsoever to the people who were living there. But now, that couldn't be done today because the people would demand. The other factor, too, is the money. Starting in 1972, OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, so that kept America and other countries out because we use more than we export.
Right.
We export to Japan. Do you know that all of our oil in Alaska, we sell to Japan instead of using it ourselves? Anyway, never mind. That's but the OPEC bonanza was the largest transfer of riches in the history of the world, even more than all that the Spanish stole from the New World. And the Spanish stole it over a period of 200 years. This has happened in 20 years. And it's billions. The OPEC countries now have roughly 1/3 of the world's capital. 1/3. So even if all the oil stopped tomorrow, if they stop getting money tomorrow, they're going to be players for 100 years. The OPEC people, most of whom are Arab,
right,
and 11 of 13 are Muslim. They're going to be players in the world because of the wealth they've got.
Right.
And in the beginning, they acted a little bit like the Texas oil millionaires, the nouveau riche and so forth. Not now. The people in the United Arab Emirates and Qatar and Oman are very wise what they're using their money for. And they're fine universities, and they're starting financial centers for banks and so forth. Dubai is the biggest financial center between London and Hong Kong. So we need to understand. And people here at East Tennessee State University, a large percentage will have something to do with the Middle East, or the Middle East will affect their lives. So here's an opportunity for them to begin to understand a little bit about what went on in the Middle East.
Well, it's a wonderful opportunity for our university. It's a wonderful opportunity for our students, and I hope that many of them will take advantage of your course and your expertise, and we hope that you will come back and talk to us again about other issues and other experiences that you've had in your life.
I'm giving 4 public lectures as part of the Baszler Chair. I gave one in November, the 11th of November, on the origins of problems in the Middle East, and a sort of an outline, introduction. Then I give one on the Arab-Islamic roots of the Italian Renaissance, and then one on modernization versus modernizing education versus westernizing schooling in the Middle East. And then the other is the difference in the way people think between the Middle East and the West.
Well, those will all sound like wonderful lectures, and
they're open to the public, and they will be online.
Okay, so we will be able to record those, and they'll be available for people to listen to through iTunes and other.
The 11/11 lecture is already on iTunes.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you again.